I'll go ahead and test. Is that working?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, sounds
Perfect.
good. Since it's using this here. Okay. Hi, all. I think we're still waiting for a couple board members, so we give another minute. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get going. Looks like we have 7 or 9. This is Craig Seacrest. I'm the, program administrator designee, and we'll get through that. Director David Averill is going to be as co-chair, will be chairing the meeting initially to take us through our board chairman election. Let me start off just by doing roll call real quick. So I have David.
How's it going, everybody?
Good. Chris?
Here.
Matt Farmer?
Here.
Sorry, Kathleen Brackey?
Here.
Dawn Block?
Here.
Kelly Blinn? Kelly, I think I saw you there.
Yeah, can you not hear me?
Yeah, there you are. And then Richard Coffin.
Here.
Okay. And then Mark Garcia, I didn't see you on yet. And I don't think Shoshana has joined us yet. Okay, Mr. Director Averill, we have a quorum. If you'd like to go ahead and kick off the meeting.
Great. Thanks, Craig. And thanks everybody for being here. We just have a few little housekeeping items of note, I guess. Number one, we'd like to acknowledge that Bonnie Trowbridge had served her full term on the board and has rotated off, and we want to thank her for her service on behalf of the board and CDOT and CTE and getting this thing off to the races here as we have over the last few months. I also want to congratulate Don Block and Matt Fromer for being reappointed, and also thank Matt for the role he played as board chair up to this point. And then I'm just tickled to welcome and congratulate Kathleen Brackey as a new board member. Kathleen, you don't need to introduce yourself to me. I've known you for over 20 years, and I'm just beside myself that you're joining us. But for the benefit of the other folks on the call or on the Zoom, would you maybe spend a minute giving us a little bit of background and introducing yourself?
Great. Thank you so much, David. It is so great to see you and to have this honor to serve on the CTE board. I really appreciate it. Obviously, longstanding passion in transportation work and know many of you from that space, and also great to meet many new board members as well. So I'm just thrilled to be here and have this opportunity to work alongside you and to work with Craig and the CDOT team to move these initiatives forward. So thank you, and it's wonderful to have a friendly faces plural on the board. So thank you again.
Outstanding. Thanks, Kathleen. The other piece of housekeeping that we need to do, and Craig kind of alluded to it with his introduction earlier, but we need to formally approve Craig Seacrest as the new CTE program administrator, replacing Kay in that role. If that's okay with anybody, we could make a motion to do that, to formally approve Craig as the new CTE. Do I get a motion for that from somebody?
I move we approve Craig as the director of the CTE.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Is there anything we want to discuss about this before we have a vote? I'll just say I'm thrilled to have him on board. I think it's going to be great. So with that, I'll put it to a vote. All those in favor of approving Craig Seacrest as the new CTE program administrator, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Doesn't sound like it. So Craig, congratulations. You're official, if you will.
Thank you.
And then one last little bit, still not inconsequential, but we need to elect a new board chair. I am going to go out on a limb here and nominate Chris Jones as that role. I don't know if anybody wants to second that or make their own competing nominations, or we could go from there.
David, I just want to note that Mark and Shoshana have both joined, so we have all 9 board members now.
Great. Thanks, Craig.
I would like to second the motion for Chris Jones as chair.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathleen. Any discussion on this?
I'll just say thank you for the nominations. And thank you to Director Frommer for his great leadership of this commission to date so far. And glad you're still here with us.
Great. Any other discussion before we vote? Doesn't sound like it. Let's put it to a vote. All those in favor of having Chris Jones be the new CTE board chair, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Doesn't sound like it. So congratulations, Chris. You're our new board chair. And what that means is that you get to run the rest of the meeting. So I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Averill.
You bet.
And thanks, everybody. And I will look forward to serving you all, the commission and the CTE in this role. And we'll try to run as efficient meetings as Chair Frommer has for some time now. So with that, our first order of business is to approve the minutes from the October meeting, which I was not present for. So hopefully folks have had a chance to review the minutes, and if there are any changes, or if there are none, if we can hear a motion to approve the minutes.
I'd make a motion to approve those minutes from the October meeting.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor? Say aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes approved. And I have already messed up in my chair role. The agenda changed from what I had seen earlier. We do have a public comment section. I want to make sure if there are any members of the public present that they have an opportunity to speak now and raise their hand. Do we have anybody from the public?
Chris, I believe this works as people were asked to sort of pre-notify us if they wish to make any public comments. We didn't receive any. I did receive an email from David Prunsinger from Dottie in Denver, but he wasn't wishing to speak. His comments were providing some recommendations based on things that he saw in the board packet.
All right. Well, with that, then we will move on to our next agenda item, which is back to you, Craig, on the program administrator update.
Sure. Desiree, you can go ahead and forward. So first of all, thank you all for appointing me as the program administrator. I'm looking forward to playing in this role or performing in this role. And so I've been excited to have my first board meeting here. So thanks all for the opportunity. This should be pretty quick. Just a couple of general updates about the enterprise. One thing is I came on board in December 2nd, and since then I've had a chance to talk to all the board members and get some sense of who you are and kind of what your interests and priorities are for this next year. So I've enjoyed that. My sense is it's just a very strong group. We all recognize we got a lot to do, and I'm looking forward to working with you. I'm working on a future board meeting schedule. Our hope is to have board meetings the last Tuesday of every month. I don't know if we can get the same slot, but we're going to try. But we're going to try and get into a regular cadence and move from what's been a quarterly meeting schedule to monthly, at least for the 6 to 9 months. As we try and stand up SB 230. As part of that effort, we're also going to try and look at doing a in-person meeting or two, preferably one here in Denver and then one somewhere out around the state somewhere. We're working to get that nailed down, and once I do, I'll get that out to you so everyone can get it on their schedules. The other major thing is we did put out the CTE annual report. It's a legislative requirement. And that was submitted to both the commission and the legislature, and it's currently posted on the website. I believe that's our third year reporting, providing that annual report. Just a couple updates on progress. First of all, is on the retail delivery fee program. We currently have our second NOFA out for planning grants. They're due February 7th. I don't think we've received any yet, but we're hoping to get several applications for the grants. Secondly, we have plans to issue a second round of capital, a second round of capital grants and getting a NOFA out. That's still pending some procurement issues that we're developing, but I think we're now looking at perhaps kind of late summer for getting that out. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention is that the sort of other parts of CDOT, the rail group has been working and developing a master agreement with Union Pacific Railroad. Because of the rail passenger program under SB 230, it's likely that the CTE is going to be part of that agreement. So I've been sort of asked to provide some preliminary approvals for that master agreement. We'll be doing that after the meeting. If anyone has any questions about that, let me know. But it doesn't really mean anything right now. It's more just to get things lined up down the road if we are doing some things with the Front Range Rail. Any other questions?
Hey, Craig, I have a super quick question for you. I'm sorry if you said a date, but what's sort of the tentative timeline on the capital grant round, the next capital grant round?
Part of it is that we've been working on a national procurement agreement, and we want to get that in place before we do. Okay. The last thing I saw was I think we're hoping, and Kay, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're looking now at kind of like summer, early fall.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more like fall. But we'll keep you posted. The most recent info will be shared on the Transit Monthly meetings because of the tie to the national price agreement.
Okay. Will we be discussing that again before that goes out? Or is it just going to kind of be on autopilot? You guys are going to do it?
Good question. If the board would like us to bring it back and talk about it again, we surely can. But at this point, I think it was fairly well. I thought it was great. Then we're moving forward.
The only question I would raise is just, and I don't want to send us down this rabbit hole, like completely derail us. But my understanding was that most of the grants were incremental cost grants, like the incremental cost for electrification versus buying an entire vehicle. And that works when we've got federal grant funding that's flowing. And since it's been held up, I kind of wonder how that may impact us or our program if we're doing these incremental cost grants versus a full vehicle. If there's federal money tied to the award in another way, just something to think about. We'll see how it actually pans out for us. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is everything going on with the federal programs right now is it's not just day by day, it's hour by hour right now. So we're just, I think, kind of waiting to see what happens.
To me, that was just like a yellow flag for us to think about, though. If we're going to tie these CTE awards to other federal awards, there might be some issues there potentially. We'll see how it goes.
Good point. Okay, Chris, I think that's all I have.
I see Kay raised her hand.
Yeah, and I think just to weigh in a little bit, I think it is prudent for the board to kind of review previous funding rounds and just make sure everything worked as intended. And that it definitely is our intention that we'll go back and say, okay, what went well with the capital round? What could we improve for the capital round? So expect those conversations to happen a little bit later in the summer and closer to when the NOFA would be released. But definitely hear your feedback, David.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Craig and Kay, for that update. And back to you, Kay, Cassie, and Sam for the financial update.
Hello, Kay Raska, Enterprise Controller. So on the following slide is CTE's budget to actual for Fund 540, which is currently collecting the retail delivery fee. So through December, we've currently collected $5.2 million and earned approximately $327,000 of interest For expenses, we have mostly had, it's been related to staff salaries and attorney general fees. What is going to change for the next meeting is in December, we did have a TC loan of 600,000, and that agreement did get signed and the funds did get dispersed to CTE in December. So we are going to start having a multi-fund presentation of the budget to actual, because we'll be showing Fund 540, which is here for the retail delivery fee. And then we're also going to be showing then Fund 541, which is the fund that our transportation commission loan is held in. And then when the new oil and gas production fee starts being collected, that goes into the 3 new funds that were created with that new revenue stream. And those 3 funds will also be shown separately as well. So we will have a multi-fund presentation, and I will also let Sam speak to that from the budget perspective as well. So I will now turn it over to Sam and Cassie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Foster. I'm the budget analyst in the Office of Financial Management and Budget. And on the next slide, we have slide after this, we have the chart of the revenues to date. So showing FY24 and what we have so far of FY25. So the update from the last meeting would be October, November, December. And you can see those revenues right around the forecast line. And the updates on the left side, and the most recent FY26 forecast for this upcoming year next year, got that around 12.9 million. And then we also have our most up-to-date FY26 oil and gas production fee forecast totaling around 55.5 million. And then the second slide here that I'll talk about, we just have our update on the cash balances up to this point. We've got the 19.4 that was the year-ending balance last year. And then as of January 17th, there's currently 25 million. And just comparing that to the total spending authority adopted by the Joint Budget Committee almost a year ago, about 18.1 million. That's all I have on these couple slides, and I can give it back to Chris.
All right, any questions from commissioners on the financial update? Hearing none, we will go back to Craig for the oil and gas production fee program implementation overview.
Thanks, Chris. So this is going to be admittedly a little bit of a slog. As I've told some of the board members, a lot of the purpose today is to provide the context for what we're going to be doing over the next year. And so the primary focus, in addition to running the existing retail delivery fee program, is going to be standing up SB 240 or SB 230 programs, and in particular the formula program, which has quite a bit of policy to it. So I'm going to go through what I've laid out as our overall process for implementing the program. It includes talking about the provisions that are in the bill, what this means for some of the decisions that the board's going to have to make, and then getting into the nuts and bolts of what we're going to have to do over the next year in terms of policy making and then our schedule. I just encourage board members to go ahead and raise your hand and stop me as I'm going through this. We allotted some time for this portion of the board meeting so that you can ask questions. So go ahead on to the next slide. So first of all, the act itself, I know that Kay has presented this on the past. That's probably been a while ago. So just as a refresher, the SB 24-230 established the oil and gas production fee to fund transit and rail investment. It's also funding the program at Department of Natural Resources, but they're separate funds. The new program, there's actually 3 programs under SB 230 for the CTE. The first is the Local Transit Operations Formula Grant Program. That's kind of the biggest part of it at 70% of the funds. And that's what I said, a lot of the focus is going to be on the next year, is figuring out how we stand up that program and distribute the funds. There's also 10% of the funding is going to go towards a local transit discretionary grant program. And then 20% is set aside for passenger rail funding program, and that's discretionary as well. The law provides quite a bit of guidance on program implementation. It speaks a bit about the eligibility, who can receive the funds. And this is true for all of them, but particularly for the formula program. It identifies factors that the board and CTE is to consider in developing the formulas. And then it has very specific requirements associated with reporting and accountability. And I'll get to a more detailed schedule in a second, but we're looking at actual implementation of the program with funds starting to flow about January 2026, so about a year from now. Unless there's questions, let's go on to the next slide. So this is just to give you an idea of how the actual funds will flow under the oil and gas program. So basically nothing happens until July 1st. And July 1st, the oil and gas producers are now, will now need to pay in fees on their production. But again, nothing really happens until after the first quarter. So the quarter begins July 1st, it ends September 30th. I think by October 7th or 8th, the Energy and Carbon Reduction Commission establishes the average spot price for oil and gas. And that gets transmitted to us. And then the board has essentially a month from October 7th to establish what the oil and gas production fee will be to fund the CTE. And that gets communicated to Department of Revenue, and that goes out to the producers. And then the producers have until November 30th to pay in the amount due for the first quarter. So we're not actually getting money until 5 months into the program. And then I figured December 1, that money's there. That's when we can apply the formula and figure out how it gets distributed. And again, ideally, money's starting to flow beginning of January 2026. There will also be the 20% and 10% for passenger rail and for the discretionary program. And I said for right now, we're going to kind of keep our powder dry on those two programs. But as we get, make some progress on the formula program, we'll talk about how we're going to roll those out as well. And then this lighter blue on this just shows what happens the second quarter. Is essentially we'll be following that same process every quarter. So for the second quarter that ends December 30th, the actual pricing gets done about 5 months after that, or 5 months after the beginning of the quarter. So sometime in February, March. Let me go on to the next slide. So this is, since I've started in early December, I've been trying to make sense of what all's in the bill and what it's really going to take to make this, for us to be able to set up the program. And I've divided that into 6 basic kind of elements or components. First of all is the contracts agreements. There's stakeholder engagement to help inform the process. There's some policy decisions we need to make around eligibility and qualifying agencies to receive the funding. There's the apportionment formula itself. There's the reporting requirements that I had talked about. And then there's also just the overall job of running the CTE and program management. So I'm going to go into details on each of these. And again, I encourage everyone to stop and ask questions as I go through. Let's go ahead to the first one. So contracts and agreements, it's likely we're going to have, a whole new slate of grant agreements that need to get improved in order for the formula funds to move. And it's important to get that done on a timely basis and to make sure that the money is flowing, but also that we've got the right kind of contractual frameworks in place. So, this is probably not that going to engage the board that much, but as part of this effort, we need to get contract templates in place. We're making sure we've got good, clear definition on what are eligible costs and activities. And the legislation is pretty wide open on that, so we don't see limiting much. But there may be things that that either we don't think should be reimbursable, or may cause a lot of contractual headaches, and we may want to discourage it, but we can get that down the road. As part of the contracts, I think something that would be very important is establishing reporting requirements and making sure we can have accountability as the grants are going out to make sure they're having the impact we want. And then I said, given the amount of contracts that we know we're going to need to get out, we want to work to streamline the process as much as possible. So we lessen the burden both on us, but most importantly on the transit agencies and the customers that are receiving this money. In terms of the board role for this, I think it's largely oversight and guidance. I'm not sure that we really see anything where the board needs to do an actual approval. So we'll be more just informing you on our process. Some of the challenges I think we're going to face in addressing this issue. One is, are we going to need very customized contracts, which, can be helpful in targeting the funding, but that can create some challenges in processing them. So we need to strike a balance there. One of the issues that we're going to have is the law stipulates that the funds have to be spent in 2 years. However, because of the way that the fees are imposed, we're not going to know the exact amount of funding for the whole year. We'll know on a quarterly basis. We don't want to do quarterly contracts, so we got to figure out how do we balance not having to do a whole lot of contract work and amendments and things like that, while still not over committing or underfunding the contracts. And I think that's going to be a learning curve to figure out how we do that correctly or as efficiently and effectively as possible. Like I said, there's broad statutory guidance on eligible activities. So there's not a lot to tell us like what we ought to try and restrict or what's open. That's going to be up to some of the discretion of the board. Like I said, what we put in those contracts lays the groundwork for accountability. So both in terms of supporting our ability to report out on how the program is doing, but also to make sure that the program's as effective as possible. And then lastly, I think with the amount of funding that's available in this program, we've got the ability to incentivize or disincentivize various considerations. That's things I think we will look for input from the board on, is in the contracting processes, the things we want to push agencies toward, or push them away from. So that's the first element. Let me just stop and see if anyone has any questions about what that entails or what the job is. All right, let's go on to the second one. Okay, we plan to do a stakeholder engagement. I'm in the process of trying to get a consultant on board that's going to support us with that effort. Really there's sort of a twofold purpose of this. One, we want to get out there and provide information to potential grantees about what the program is and what the requirement's going to be. But we also want to hear their concerns and issues about the program, particularly when it relates to the contracting process, but also, how they might be using these funds and what the concern is about the way the quarterly flow of funds is going to go, things like that. Our intent is to do a series of town halls, probably 5 or 6 town halls with different transit agencies around the state. But we also want to hear from other stakeholders, particularly the other interest groups and officials that were involved in helping to get SB 230 approved. We want to hear their concerns about the program and what their interests are. I think some of the challenges with that is, as you'll see from this presentation, standing up SB 230 is kind of complex. So we need to figure out a way to explain that in a way that makes sense to everyone. We got to be careful about not creating unrealistic expectations. We're not sure that everyone that operates transit in the state is going to be eligible. So we want to be clear that, we're trying to be, fair and equitable and transparent about this. But just because they're invited to engage in a town hall doesn't necessarily mean they're guaranteed funding. I think it's important to differentiate this from existing CDOT grant programs. As a formula program and, is focused on a broad range of operations, it's a little bit of a different animal than some of the other programs, and it has its own parameters to it. So we want to make sure people understand that it's not going to be necessarily just like all the other FTA grants or other DTR programs. And also, this is new, so agencies may not really know exactly how they're going to use this money or what they're going to do with it. So we may or may not get good information there. I would say, it's not required, but it would be great if we get board members participate in some of those town halls. I'll be working with you individually to talk about that. And also, as we're planning the engagement process over the next month or two, I'll be looking for board input to make sure that we're doing that process effectively as possible. Any questions on the stakeholder engagement piece? All right, let's go on element 3.
Did I see Kathleen raise her hand?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I did the regular hand instead of my little, the yellow hand. Thank you for the overview, and I really appreciate, Craig, you identifying this board role for, how can we help support this and be a connection to the communities and participate in the town halls. I was curious if you had an idea of what the time frame would be. Is this something perhaps over the next 3 months or 6 months, kind of just trying to understand how this maps out over the year?
Good question. I as soon as possible. So I've got a scope of work, a budget, and the contract with Confluence Policy Group, I think is the name of the consultant. As soon as I can get them under contract and going, we're going to get this planned out. But ideally, it's going to happen in the next 2 to 3 months. I think given where we need to be here by, even June or July, it needs to happen as soon as possible. So, in a perfect world, we'll get it planned. We'll get the contract approved ASAP. We'll get the engagement effort planned in February and probably be doing the town halls in March.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Craig, on that note, it seems like it would be a real stretch to say, hey, could you do like presentations at TPR meetings that are coming? I just don't think that's even realistic, but could we conceivably get like a presentation at the track, the Transit and Rail Advisory Committee about this kind of thing as well, just to try to get to somewhat of a broad group?
Sure. I actually just did a brief presentation at the last track meeting on, it was Friday. I kind of wanted to keep my powder dry before I had a chance to talk to the board. But now that I've presented this to the board, I'd be happy to go and present this at the next track meeting.
I think, another good
if there's other forums with Castor or something where it makes sense, I'm happy to make myself available to do them.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Let's go on to element 3. Okay, now we're getting into the real kind of sausage making part of this, which is eligibility and qualification. And I think, in my mind, they're two very related activities. So eligibility is coming out and defining, here are the transit providers that, we feel that the board feels have the potential for receiving funding. When we define that universe of potential grant recipients in that. And then qualification is sort of the step further of the agencies that are eligible. Now, here are the steps that we need to go through to say, all right, you've qualified to get the funds as well. So, as I said, they're pretty interrelated, but I think it's helpful to think of them somewhat separately as well. As part of that effort, first of all, we have to define the eligibility factors. What, are there specific characteristics of agencies that we think should be in or ones that are not in or not going to be eligible? And then, there'll also be, I think, quite a bit of interaction between this effort and the formula effort or formula development effort. As we look at the implications of allocating funds different ways, that may, lead you to want to have more or less agencies sort of in the pool of eligible grantees. So as part of this, we're, the board's role, I think, is going to be to help us, first of all, to let me know and CDOT know, what information or analysis do you need to really inform the eligibility question. We need to agree on, I think, improve eligibility rules, and then, potentially then also have the board approve qualification requirements. Some of the challenges and considerations with this effort, first of all, the statutory guidance on eligibility is extremely broad. It says, all government any local government agencies, and includes nonprofits. So they didn't provide much in the way of limits on who could be eligible. Similarly, the language on qualification is a bit broad. The statute does note that eligible agencies will need to provide I think they called it a service optimization plan, which isn't necessarily really a term of art that we're all familiar with. I do think we have some broad leeway to define that in some way, but essentially we're going to need to come up with some mechanism to see what eligible agencies have in terms of plans for using the money to improve the service, to deem them eligible, and then to have them something to hold them accountable to. Balancing outcomes of narrow versus broad eligibility. In some ways, if we go very broad and everyone's in the pool, everyone gets a little bit of money, but may be difficult to really have a strong impact on mode shift and this greenhouse gas reduction. On the other hand, if we're trying to really improve accessibility and mobility, that can speak and target some of the or address some of the target audiences or markets that were listed in the legislation, that might beg for spreading the money around a little bit. So part of what I think the board's going to have to wrestle with is what's the right balance. CDOT has a lot of existing grant rules for different programs. We might have some unique considerations for this program, but I think we also want to make sure we're as consistent as possible. I think that'll make a lot more sense, both internally to the folks at CDOT have to process it, but also to the transit agencies, our customers are used to those existing rules. Whatever we do, I think needs to really pass a test of being fair, logical, and transparent. And then again, need to understand that there's, as we go down this road on eligibility qualification, we might make some progress, look at the formula and apportionment process and decide we need to revisit it. So I just want to set expectations for that. Questions about the eligibility and qualification effort?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if we want to get into the weeds here, but I did have a question about the eligible entity definition.
Sure.
And the way I read the definition, it would include any local government, but for nonprofits, I read that as only nonprofits that provide public transit. So I guess then we would have to see if that meets our definition of public transit, right? So kind of limits it to some extent, right?
Yeah, although, public transit tends to have a broad range of definitions too. You can find different definitions, but yeah, I mean, part of it is we're going to have to decide, is who's in there, and let's just put it out there. One of the issues that's going to be, I think, an important decision is do we want closed door providers involved in this or not? And the board's going to need to make a decision on that. But so fair enough, though. Yeah. Other questions? All right, let's move on to element 4. So this is the big one. This is the stab with the actual apportionment formula. And just so everyone knows, basically the formula will be, at some point, it'll be the math that determines, once we know the total amount of funding that's available, who gets what. So, definitely one of those public policy efforts where people are probably going to, they'll be perceived winners and losers. And, if we do our job well, probably no one's totally happy. But hopefully everyone, feels that it's has been done through a transparent process, and it's fair, and then it's very much aligned with the intentions of the legislation and the governor's priorities as well. But yeah, so we'll start this effort to develop the formula. We've already begun collecting data and looking different options. I'm in the process of hiring a decision science consultant. I realize not everyone knows what decision science is, but essentially someone can help us come in, look at sort of multiple objectives, figure out how do you put them into sort of one consistent mechanism, adjust these disparate factors so that you can get them into sort of a single consistent methodology. So it's someone I've worked with before, is a leading expert in the field, and I think will be very helpful. But basically, we need to, as part of that, we need to decide what are the specific criteria we're going to look at. The legislation identifies 6 or 7. They include, I would say they're very focused on sort of either system size or market potential. So they look at things like population density, ridership, vehicle revenue miles, and then disproportionately impacted communities. It also says local zoning without a whole lot of definition of what that is. So, we know we need to include those in the formula somehow. They're a little bit of apples and oranges, so we've got to figure out how we can sort of equivocate those things so they all work in a formula. And then we need to decide, are there other factors that we want to consider in the formula as well. So first of all, that's sort of the first step of figuring out what are we going to think about. And then the second thing is really figuring out how do you organize that into a structure that works. And then there's the always so difficult task of figuring out how you weight these different considerations. And the thought is we'll develop a model to be able to do that. We'll be able to play around with different weighting approaches and see what kind of outcomes we get in terms of how the funds get distributed. And, I think ultimately, there'll be a combination of art and science to get us to the right decision. What I'm looking for the board is, first of all, what information and analysis do you need to help inform your decision? I think obviously a lot of that is going to just be putting ideas or suggestions in front of you. But ultimately, the board's going to be asked to make a decision and approve a final apportionment formula. And we'll probably also need to decide, how much that will adjust, or whether if there's a cadence to how we want to review the apportionment formula in future years. Some of the challenging considerations. They say what's in the legislation on formulas leaves some work to be done in terms of interpretation. Getting data to support some of those considerations, I think local zoning is a good example, is going to be a challenge. In some ways, I think that, again, the local zoning is a good example of a place where we may use something that maybe isn't what we completely desire. We want something with more teeth, but the information isn't available right now, but perhaps will be down the road. But again, I think my job will be to develop and evaluate the data, but I just want to set the expectation that there are places where our data is going to be a little weak. One thing that is not in the legislation, but I think we may want to look at is, do we want to look at some sub-allocations? So rather than just dumping every agency into one formula, do we want to group like agencies, say like the resort agencies or rural agencies? I think one of the challenges we have is that it's tough to have a formula that's going to accommodate RTD with some of these small rural agencies. Like, it just doesn't really work that well mathematically. So we may have to look at some sub-allocation approaches to help us make the formula, I think, work better. Don't know the answers to that, but again, we're setting some expectations that we may at least want to explore that. There's some of this gets back to some of the messiness in the data, but it's not like the transit agencies are perfectly exclusive from each other. There's a lot of overlapping boundaries. So some of the considerations we're going to be sharing, population or service areas, things like that. You got to figure out how we deal with that. And again, there's going to be this sort of back and forth between the apportionment and the eligibility. Let me stop there and see if there's any questions. Okay. All right, reporting requirements. And so there's sort of 2 sets of reporting requirements. There's what we need to do on the overall program, and that's the dashboard type of thing. And, that part, it doesn't feel like is going to be that, overwhelmingly challenging. However, there's also specific language in the legislation that essentially says for any grant recipients that have service areas over 1 million in population, that they have to do some additional reporting. And the reporting is pretty significant. It includes putting their budget on the website. It has providing a lot of information on the status of capital projects, changes in service, and then coming up with a specific dashboard. So, we need to really, the board's going to have to decide what's going to satisfy or enable you to say that that reporting complies. And think of what does it really mean to have compliance or non-compliance. The obvious agency that's covered by this is RTD. So I think something that we're somewhere along the point, I think we're going to want to have RTD come in and talk about what their proposed approach and timeline is for that compliance. But the board is going to have a role in essence in sort of validating the compliance with those reporting requirements. Again, the guidance on the specific requirements and the timing of those requirements is a bit broad, and having the ability to assess compliance may or may not be particularly easy. So we'll have to see how challenging that is as we get into it. Questions about the reporting? I think Matt, you got a question?
Yeah, this is, I guess, more of a flag. There's a bill under consideration right now. I don't think it's been introduced yet, but Senator Winter is leading on it. That really focuses on RTD, improving RTD. And in the draft bill, which I think was released last Friday to the stakeholder group, the Transit Tuesday stakeholder group, there's a section on dashboards that would essentially make this a requirement. And I haven't compared the language in that draft to Senate Bill 230, but I imagine there's pretty strong overlap there. So I just want to flag that.
I know there was a bill introduced last week, but it was kind of like it was very much of a kind of an accounting cleanup. It was short. It's like a paragraph. It had to do with essentially, I think, how they were categorizing operating costs or something like that. I suspect what you're talking about is different and broader. I think part of my role here is to be staying abreast of legislation that's coming out. And if there's legislation that's going to influence our implementation of SB 230 to one, track it and see what's going on, but also to bring those issues to the board so that you're familiar with it. One thing I would also note about these reporting requirements, as they relate to RTD, is they feel pretty separated from our actual funding. So, there's sort of that portion of the reporting where we need to sort of, say how much money we're getting out there, how many grants we're making, and hopefully we can get to the point to talk about the impact it's having on mode shift and ridership and greenhouse gas reduction. The specific requirements related to agencies serving over 1 million people are much more about their overall operations and performance. So, it's not like there's any real tie or there's very little tie, I think, to the funding we'd actually be providing to the agency. They're sort of separate or mutually exclusive. All right, any other questions on the reporting? Okay, last one, element 6. So again, this is more of just the nuts and bolts of running the overall program. I've mentioned performance measures a bit, but we're going to need, right now we have some performance metric for the retail delivery fee. We're going to need to come up with performance metrics for the SB 230 programs. There's quite a bit of coordination that needs to go on with other state and agencies. The oil and gas fee is not just limited to the CTE. So both the Department of Revenue needs to collect the funds, and we need to work with DNRA on their fund setting. So I'll be doing that coordination. We're going to have, it's going to be quite a good sized budget, and we got a lot to do in terms of grants management. So particularly once we get through some of these policies, the big policy issues, the focus is then going to shift to managing all these grants that we'll have out there. And then I think there'll be a role in ongoing stakeholder communications. One thing, and I talked earlier about that schedule where the rate setting happens. So there will be a quarterly role for the board to set the quarterly rates for the oil and gas fee. And then I think the board just has a general role in overseeing the program performance and providing guidance and input on that. Challenging considerations, we know that we've got these other two programs that need to get stood up. I don't want to give them short shrift. They're important. We just feel like we need to get the formula program set up first. There may be some relationships that we want to see with what we're doing with the formula program. That may influence parameters we want to put in place for the discretionary grant program for transit. And then rail, we'll be getting to that down the road. I think we've got some time before we really need to make progress on that. And then we know that there's just going to be, the demands that are being on both CTE staff, CDOT, and that really the board is going to increase significantly, at least over the next 6 to 9 months. So let me just hop there. That's sort of the big view on what we need to do here in the next 6 to 9 months. Questions?
One quick question. Does that 2-year spend requirement, does that apply to everything?
Good question. I was out there today. I believe it's just the formula program. But I actually had a question today and was going to go back and look at that. But I'll get back to you on that. But I don't think it involves the rail program. I'm not sure about the discretionary grant program.
Any other questions? Well, Craig, thank you for this presentation. We certainly. Oh, go ahead.
I think I got one more slide here just to give you a schedule.
And I see Director Frommer's hand is up.
Okay, go ahead, Director Frommer.
I think you might be answering my question with the slide, so I'm gonna let you go.
Okay, well, and I just tried to. This is very much a draft and something I'm throwing against the wall, but I tried to take a look at what's it going to take to get this program stood up by. So that funds can actually flow by January. I don't know what color that is, sort of orangish or tan color is, that's just sort of more informational or discussions that the board will have. And the green cells there are where there'll actually be a decision making. But as you can see, we're going to be working on a lot of things in parallel. Next month is where I think we really going to jump into the fray and start talking about eligibility and formula considerations. I'm hoping we can get into sort of a 2 to 3 meeting cycle where I introduce a topic like eligibility. I get some guidance or direction from the board about what information you need or what considerations you want to look at. We can have a kind of a technical session the next meeting, where we kind of dig into it. Hopefully we refine some options and some guidance. And then within 1 or 2 meetings after that, hopefully we're moving towards an actual board approval and decision. So as you'll see, I have the eligibility and the pre-qualification process somewhat working in parallel. I think we dip our toe into the apportionment formula, but hopefully by April or so, we've made a decision on the eligibility and qualification portion of it. And then by July, we're moving towards an apportionment formula decision. And then that gives us time to then be able to have what we need in place to be able to apply the formula to the funding when it's available in December. So that's a lot to go on. I'd also note that while this is going on, we sort of got the day job of the CTE of running the retail delivery fee. So we'll also have, on our agenda going forward, we'll have decisions about the grant allocations, we'll budget decisions. We'll have other work that's going on with that. I also don't really have anything in this schedule yet about standing up the discretionary grant program. So that, I think if we can make some progress by June, July, in standing up the formula program, and then hopefully the sort of policy lift is a little less on that, then we can work into starting to stand up the discretionary program. But like I said, this is likely going to evolve and change as we go. But I wanted to give the board just sort of a taste for what's going on and show the level of engagement we're going to need to have over the 6 months as we work through some, we're going to be some, let's call them fun but challenging policy topics. Okay, that's it, Chris. Unless there's any other questions.
Any more questions? It seems that yes, you and we do have a lot of work ahead of us. So thank you for diving in so quickly, Craig, in your role and mapping this out for us. Not seeing any other hands on questions, it moves into our next agenda item as you talked about the details of the work that we have ahead. I know you've taken the liberty to map out some programmatic goals, some higher level goals that we should be thinking about and working from as we're making these decisions moving forward. So in lieu of a 3-day retreat in the mountains to really dive into all the ins and outs of goal setting and mission setting, thank you for providing us some a place to start. So if we could move the slide forward. I know that we have a number of goals that you would like to talk through with the commissioners and hopefully get a blessing from us today. So as you are moving forward in your work in the month and months ahead, we're all speaking the same language of what we're trying to get done.
Sure. So it kind of occurred to me as like, well, one, it'd be nice to have the board sort of chew on something this first meeting rather than just listening to me as a talking head. But secondly, as we're working through all this process, I feel like sometimes it's helpful to have some broad goals defined. I think they provide a sort of a sounding board for, is this really what we set out to do? So hopefully these will be things that we would reflect on. So again, I took the liberty of just trying to draft some goals that you might work from. It built from what's in the legislation, from what's in the governor's transportation vision 2035, and then just some of my own experience working on putting together programs and goals. I thought these might make a decent set. So there's 6 goals that are here. The first one is just optimize program impacts on greenhouse gas. I think it's good for us to remember that that's really the underlying justification for the oil and gas production fees being there, and it's something that should be driving all of our considerations. I think clearly we want to grow the extent and quality of available transit services throughout Colorado. Again, sort of, it's really what the money's going to be doing. So making sure that what we're putting in place helps to do that. I think achieving an equitable balance between urban and rural transit providers is something that we're always trying to do. It's always a challenge, but something we need to be mindful of. I do feel like, there's a lot of money at stake here. It's important that what we do is transparent, both in terms of the policy you develop and then in our processes that we establish for implementing the program. I think we want to create as little administrative burden as we can, both for CDOT, because we've got a lot we got to get through. But again, most importantly, on our CTE customers, we don't want to put it in this program and just create some enormous reporting or proposing or a grant application process. So again, let's try and make it as simple as possible. And then last one, and this is maybe one that people hadn't thought of, but I worry a little bit about oil and gas can bounce all over the place. I think when I started like 2 months ago, I think price was in the 60s. Now it's up in the 70, like mid 70s per barrel. So there's potential that the funding stream we provide could vary widely from year to year, even quarter to quarter.
Did we lose Craig?
We need to think about that volatility so that our agencies have our grant recipients receive good connection or sorry, something popped on my computer. Have good, consistent funding. So Chris, I think you were going to try and walk the board through this and see if they're all, kind of what the thoughts are and whether they want to go with this or make some changes.
Yeah, I don't know that we need to maybe discuss every single one of these. I'd say that if folks are feeling, if we're all on the same page, if we really like one, then we don't need to discuss it. But wondering if we could do just a thumbs up, a quick thumbs up exercise, thumbs down exercise on whether you think these need work one by one. And then we can decide if there's one that we want to discuss specifically after that thumbs up, thumbs down. So the first one, optimize program impacts on greenhouse gas reduction. Do we have thumbs up for everybody, or are there any? I'm seeing thumbs up. All right. I'm seeing enough thumbs up that we don't need to discuss that one. The next one, and anybody wanting to interject on that? All right. Next one, grow the extent and quality of available transit services throughout Colorado. Thumbs up or looking around, seeing mostly thumbs up, a few abstaining. Seeing a majority thumbs up there. Feeling good. Oh, I see a hand, Kelly.
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think I just have one thought that like could fit into the first one or the second one. It feels like both are getting at the end goal of, or I guess maybe the end goal is GHG reduction, but there's maybe an intermediate goal of increasing ridership, and ideally improving and extending service is going to get us there. But I'm just wondering if it makes sense to call out ridership either in the first or second goal. Just a thought.
Chris, I think an important consideration, particularly in the second bullet there is, implicit as there is we're not simply trying to maintain existing service with this funding. It's really meant to go to net new services. And that's what I was trying to get to. And so, I mean, I think to Kelly's point, if we need to make that more specific, I could play around with the language a little bit.
Thanks. I'm seeing Kathleen's hand as well.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, if it's around effectiveness. So it's grow the extent and quality and effectiveness of available transit services, because effectiveness, there's ridership and there's a lot of other measures of effectiveness for transit. So I wonder if there's a word we could find that would be inclusive of those types of things. But I agree with you. We want something that's outcome based. So just a suggestion.
And one thing that occurred to me and Craig and I discussed was there's the goal areas and then there's the key performance indicators that tell us whether we're achieving that goal area, which is certainly not something we're discussing here today, but ridership certainly is something that would be tied to a few of these goal areas as well. So Craig, are you finding this feedback helpful?
Yeah, I think so. So I like Kelly and Kathleen's point about, focusing on the ridership as well. One thing I think is, in an ideal world, at some point, we're going to be able to translate these goals into actual performance metrics that we can report on. So, think about in that regard too. But I think that's fine. I got enough to work on there. I'm good.
Great. And I think, Kathleen, I like your added word, the effectiveness is key. All right, moving on to the third one, achieve an equitable balance between support for urban and rural transit providers. Looking for thumbs up.
And I think this is almost language specifically out of the legislation as well. I'm pretty sure it spoke to the need to find that balance.
I'm seeing thumbs mostly across the board. Kathleen, any discussion? Oh, there's a thumbs up. Oh, you found.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Especially, I appreciate the clarification, Craig, that this came from the the legislation. I guess sometimes I think about the word between versus among, and are we conveying something in a way that looks like it's a push-pull, or is it something that's more of a inclusive and more of a range? And so that would just be a suggestion. And then it's urban and rural, but it's, I guess to me, it's also transit providers of different sizes, not just the geography, but the agency size. And we're trying to lift up, multiple types of transit providers or sizes and grow this. So I guess if there's a way, I don't want to wordsmith if that's from the legislation, I want to stay true to that. But if there is a way to expand it a bit and say support for urban and rural transit providers of all sizes or of different sizes, I don't know. I'll leave the wordsmithing to you, but I was trying to convey something that's more inclusive of the variety that we have.
To be honest, I think that that's maybe something that the board's going to have to chew on a little bit, as to how far you want to go. Like I couldn't say right now that I think the board's 100% committed to trying to give funding to every single agency in the state. I think if you look at, the goals in the legislation about really focusing on greenhouse gases, that may or may not be consistent with giving funding to every agency. And to me, that's a little bit to be determined yet. I don't know that I would throw it in the goal, but again, my suggestion.
Yeah, and that's a good clarification. I guess I'm not saying all, I'm just saying that inside urban providers, there's large and small, and inside rural, there might be small and medium. I don't know. So anyway, I'll leave that too, but I definitely hear your point about more discussion. It's all versus, a set of providers.
Thank you. All right, on to the next one. Maintain full transparency for all CTE funding allocation and grant award activities. Where are we feeling thumbs on that goal?
I think that's a tough one to really go against, Chris.
Yeah, I didn't. Great. I'm seeing mostly thumbs, no wordsmithing or adjustments there. All right. The next one, limit the administrative burden on CTE customers while ensuring full accountability for how program resources are used. I'm seeing some hands. First, Director Averill.
Actually, let Mark go first. I think he had his hand up first.
It was actually on the prior vote. I had some questions on that. Maintain full transparency. I'm been concerned in the past about our grant awards and if we're getting contracts out, and if we can get an update on that, that'd be helpful. If we're not, then maybe it's worth spending some time in retreat figuring out how we can move these forward. Thank you.
I had a similar, it wasn't a similar question, but it was also to that previous bullet point. Sorry, I didn't get my hand up quite quick enough. I think this is great. Maintain full transparency for all CTE funding allocation grant award activities. We might want to think about stating that we're going to manage the program in such a way to meet legislative intent. So that if there ever is a day when the pendulum swings in Denver and these types of programs become under more scrutiny, we have a legislative audit or something like that, that we have the proof that we've done our homework, everything's in writing. I think everything I've heard today makes it sound like we are completely on that path to being very, very assured that this program will be run in a, what I'll call bulletproof manner, to withstand a legislative audit. But I think that that's something that we should just keep in the back of our minds as the directors of this enterprise. I don't think we need to actually put it in writing, but I will definitely have that in my mindset. Having been through a legislative audit with the FASTER program, it was not fun. There were some black eyes, and I just, I think we can avoid that because we're starting from scratch. And like I said, I think we're on a great path here. So thanks for indulging me.
I think I did hear a little bit that's not in this language right now, is what I wrote here is very much focused on, accountability for the grantees and stuff. But I think you're saying there needs to be accountability for CTE, me basically,
Yeah,
making sure that we're not a bottleneck and that we're running the program effectively. So
exactly.
I think I could throw something in there related to the CTE's program administration effectiveness or something like that.
Great.
Great feedback. Thank you. All right, back to the following one on limiting the administrative burden.
Sorry, I didn't hear a response to my question on.
Contract status of our previous grants.
Yes, please. Chris, do you have any info on that by chance?
I do not. Is Kay on the call?
I can provide that information.
I can actually hop in here. So, so we do have our dashboard up, which shows the status of where all the currently kind of awarded grants are in the process. But Shilpa, did you want to provide additional information just kind of generally about where the planning grants are and where the capital grants are in the process?
Sure. I think planning grants are in the process of contract execution along with the scope finalization, and rest of the capital projects are in the budgeting phase, and all the awardees are requested to complete their risk assessment and milestone from the co-trans. That's it.
Thank you, Director Garcia. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I can go look at the dashboard. It sounds like we still don't have all the contracts out on previously awarded grants, but they're in the process or in the queue, and that's been the case for months. So I am concerned about that.
Yes, the capital projects were on a hold for a while because of the price changing process we are happening, and the NASPO price agreement and the CDOT price agreement. But we have really started working forward with these city capital projects.
Thank you. And I guess I just wonder, with the delay on these grants, I wonder how relevant those applications are now. Some are over a year, so pricing and all sorts of stuff is changing. It's all going up. So I'm just wondering, what are we funding at this juncture with applications now being, or awards now being, a year plus after applications, and if it's worth looking back at those and determining if those are viable programs still, or if they need more funding.
Kay, I see your hand.
Yeah, and I think just to respond, Director Garcia, to the question about the capital program, this has been a fairly common occurrence with capital. We see price increases regularly with those. And I think one of the reasons we're looking really carefully at the capital program timeline is because we know that there are price changes that happen at certain times of the year, and trying to institute a process where an agency can have a quote that they include with their application. And at the point that they're awarded, sometimes that quote is already not valid because they're only good for, 60 days sometimes. And then by the time the contract is awarded, maybe the price has changed again. So it is a challenging thing. That's one of the reasons, if you'll remember, why we put in place the reserve fund, because we know that these capital project price changes are so common, that we wanted to have the ability to make projects whole, because again, this is not a new thing. It's something that we deal with every single year with the capital program. So, but I understand your question, and we can continue to provide you updates on where all those are in the process.
Chris,
Thank
I think
you.
Don had a hand up.
I'm seeing, yeah, and I want to make sure that we're staying, on the agenda item for here, but want to give time to Dawn. Might ask before we get to Dawn, maybe in future agenda items, if we can, or future agendas for future meetings, have a matters from commissioners agenda items, so that folks who have topics that aren't necessarily addressed in the formal agenda, there's an opportunity for folks to bring up items like this.
Sure, happy to do that.
Thank you. Dawn.
Quick question on the dashboard. Do the grantees have access to that dashboard? Case so they can look at any time to be able to see where they are in the process?
So I'm happy to throw a link to the dashboard in the chat, but it's live on the website that the public has access to. It is not so much a grantee dashboard where they can say, you know, of the 60 steps in the process, this is where you are. It's kind of a higher level view of where everything is. Thanks, Mike. Mike put it in the chat for us, but it's right on the homepage of the website. We are working as an agency kind of toward a system where there's kind of more transparency to grantees between where, you know, where they are in the steps of the many steps of the process. We haven't quite implemented that system yet, but that is kind of a project that we're looking at as an agency.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Chris, I think Matt Fromer had a question in the chat where he asked if Castle Rock was urban. I don't know, probably. I don't want to make short shrift of that, but I think we're going to have to do there will be some definitions that we need to look at. One of the things that I plan to do as part of the formula development process is we'll have some tests where we'll be able to pull out the results and say, okay, what does that look like in terms of an urban rural split? You know, how's that look in terms of how, you know, different groupings of agencies perhaps are getting funding. I don't know exactly what those tests will be yet, but presumably there'll be an urban rural one at a minimum. And as part of that, we're going to have to do some definitions, but I don't really have an answer quite yet to that. Probably, I mean, you know, there may be just sort of a front range versus the rest of the state. Give us a little time to make progress on that, if you would. Good question.
Thank you. And front range among the rest of the state. I'm just following Kathleen's lead. All right, back to these goals. We're almost there. And back to this limiting the administrative burden on customers, which is really tied to the discussion we've been having related to contracting and reporting and all those things. Are folks feeling good about this language?
Yeah, I think they just heard they wanted some language in there that's, you know, to either another bullet or revise this a little bit to address CTE performance.
I'm seeing several thumbs. Any more discussion on this one? 3 thumbs up if possible. It's not a formal vote, so Robert rules do not apply. So 3 thumbs on from Co-Chair Averill. All right, last goal area. Well, maybe not last, because I want to make sure we have room for anything that's missing. Minimize the level of program funding volatility from year to year. I'm not sure how we do this other than try to decide the cost of oil and gas, but how are folks feeling about this as a goal area? Is this appropriate for the list, or maybe there's a different way we should be looking at it? Any thumbs? I'm seeing a hand from Director Brackey.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering if it's not so much minimize the level of program funding volatility, but manage the volatility, because the volatility is going to come at us, and then we just need to figure out how to
That's a good point.
manage the waves.
I was going to say the same thing of like mitigate the impact of, funding volatility. Since there might be different ways we could approach that.
Any other feedback on this goal area? Those are really good points. Hearing none, with these 6 areas defined, you know, this is really in many ways, it's the program goals, but also Craig's annual performance review goals. Want to make sure, is there anything that folks feel might be missing? We talked about ridership, and I know Craig heard that piece and a few other items. Is there anything else that folks feel might be missing from this list? All right, you mostly hit it out of the park then, Craig.
All right.
Would you like a formal, now that we've gone through this discussion, maybe if it would help and if anybody wants to make a motion in support of these goal areas with the edits that we discussed, or wait till a future meeting to do that?
Be great if you did it now if you want to. So
Might there be a motion?
A motion to vote to approve the Senate Bill 24-230 program goals.
This is
I'll
Kathleen,
second.
I'll second.
All
And
right,
with the input that we provided today.
great. So I'm hearing a second with the addition of the edits based on the input provided today. All right, any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed say nay. No one opposed. Goals approved with edits based on discussion. And with that, back to you, Craig, for next steps.
sure. All right, we're almost wrapped up here. I didn't know how long this was going to take today, so I just wanted to just give a little bit of a flavor for the next meeting. I promise. Well, I hope it's not me talking as much next time. It'll be more the board talking. But I felt like I needed to get that out. So thank you for your patience in getting through that. I'm still waiting to nail down the exact date and time. But like I said, we're going to be shooting for the last Tuesday of the month every month. My plan is to get that on Shoshana and other people's calendars, and I'll get out a calendar to everyone so you can get that planned. I'm hoping that by the next meeting, we'll have the stakeholder engagement consultant on board and have a plan that I can share with you, and you guys can provide feedback to help mold that process a little bit. We will have the EV planning grant applications will have been received. Not sure how much we'll be able to have evaluated those yet, but we'll at least be able to report out basic information about how many applications we've received and give you a flavor for what they're focused on. And then I think we're going to roll up our sleeves and start talking about the eligibility and qualifications process. And I think as directors have questions maybe leading up to that meeting, you can contact me directly. Don't only me. don't CC each other. But we are going to really delve into what we think about eligibility next meeting and hopefully make some good progress. And then I also want to kind of dip our toes in the water on the apportionment formula, kind of let you know what our thinking is in terms of the different categories, where we are in data, and what issues maybe we're looking at. David?
Yeah, just on that last bullet point, Craig, earlier you or somebody said, RTD is so different than a rural agency, and that's completely true. And I'm wondering if we should go into this thinking that we don't have to treat everybody exactly the same, because they're not the same. And maybe to get to another point that you made when you talked about sub-allocation, maybe there's a rural pot of funding and maybe there's an urban pot of funding that we get to. And if you do go that direction, there are existing apportionment formulas already in play through the 5311 program at CDOT, and then 5307 also has an apportionment program that goes through the urbanized and small urban areas. So, rather than reinvent the wheel, it might be worth taking a look at how those tools might fit. I would encourage you to do that, but of course it's your work time. So, but anyway, just food for thought.
No, I appreciate the counsel. That's in the works. Meeting with Audrey tomorrow to talk about actually what those formulas are, is trying to see what the math is. And yeah, I mean, I think the extent we can avoid reinventing the wheel, one challenge we have is that what we have in place may not exactly be consistent with,
That's exactly right.
with what's in the legislation. Like, I don't think our current ones have a local zoning criteria, and we got to figure out how we're going to turn that into a consideration. But yeah, I think we'll start with what we got. And like I said, I've got some different thoughts on ways that we might look at sub-allocation. I don't want to presuppose that that's the route we're doing, but I feel like, to kind of support the conversation, I'm happy to dump some ideas on there about ways that we might do it. We might look at, some different typologies or ways of grouping transit agencies. And, I can provide input on some of the pros and cons of doing that. One thing I would say about sub-allocations, well, they can help simplify the process. They can help, create where you've got like agencies that you're weighing against each other.
Right.
But, if you've got La Junta versus RTD, like you just can't even make that comparison. So
Yeah.
it gives you some mechanisms. The downside of it is, those sub-allocations tend to get their own life. And
Yep,
once
they
you
get kinda
decided
rigid.
that you've got that sub-allocation, now you've got institutional momentum.
Yep.
And, we don't want to get stuck with something that we really hate down the road. So we've got to balance that consideration as well.
Awesome. Totally agree. Thank you.
Chris, with that, that's all I have.
All right. Well, if there's no other updates, we don't have an officially scheduled next board meeting, but I've marked my calendar for February 27th or 25th is the last Tuesday of February. So hopefully, if that date works for everybody, we'll see that on our calendar soon. With
Chair Jones.
Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'll let you finish, but I had a question that I'd like to ask just at the very end.
All right. Well, that was all I wanted to share before I adjourn the meeting. So I'm glad you.
Yes, and I apologize. I am not very familiar with Zoom, and I could not find how to raise my hand. So I apologize. I just want to flag, and I think it can completely be handled at the next meeting, but the bylaws call for a vice chair also, and a secretary, and I just want to make for the record it clear who the vice chair is, just reaffirming who the secretary of the board is, and then stating whether it's a 2-year term, because the bylaws contemplate a 2-year term. You can absolutely not do that, but I just for clarity would recommend that the board does that.
Great, thank you for that guidance. I'd say my impression right now is that Commissioner Averill is still our co-chair as before for now, but it has been more than 2 years that he's been in that role. So Craig, can we make sure that's added maybe to the next agenda, just to affirm where we're at with commission chairs?
I can, and actually it brings up a good point, because you're essentially is yours a 1 or 2 year term? Let me check on that and get back exactly how that works.
And it's my term on the commission is due to end later this year, so that would be a little awkward. So yeah, got to figure that out.
Okay, my apologies. I hadn't really thought about that. Kathy, your other question about the board secretary, it's currently designated as Desiree Scott, and she will continue in that role.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you. And I'll get back to you on the other. I need to figure it out.
All right, Director Garcia. We can't hear you.
Mark, can you hop off mute? Or Commissioner or Director Garcia?
Nope.
Sorry about that. Can you add our terms to next month's meeting as well?
Sure.
Thank you.
Actually, Desiree, if you put back the slide, I think it's hidden. There's a slide that I'll show it next meeting. I have that information. Director Garcia, I'll provide it.
All right. If there are no more comments, I am glad to announce the adjournment of this meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.